All right, good morning, everyone. All right, welcome everyone to the 15th Annual New Orleans Metropolitan Association of Realtors Commercial Investment Division's Economic and Real Estate Forecast Symposium, presented to you by Gulf Coast Bank and Trust Company, your local community bank with a mission to combine values and service of old-fashioned banking that focuses on individualized customer service through innovative and competitive banking products.
You don't just build properties, you create opportunities, and we're here to help you make it happen. At Gulf Coast Bank and Trust, we provide the financial solutions you need to develop and grow right here at home.
Thank you, Gulf Coast Bank and Trust. Now I'd like to introduce NOMAR's CID's Economic and Real Estate Forecast Committee Chairman. Please welcome Mignon Richard Díaz.
Good morning. On behalf of the New Orleans Metropolitan Association of Realtors Commercial Investment Division, it is my pleasure to officially welcome you to the 15th Annual Economic and Real Estate Forecast Symposium. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I want to extend a warm and heartfelt welcome. We are delighted to have you with us today. To our many returning guests, whether this is your second time or your seventh, or anywhere in between, welcome back. It is wonderful to see familiar faces again, and we truly appreciate your continued participation in our annual Forecast Symposium. As for me, this is my sixth forecast and third as chairman, and I would not be standing here today without the help of my two co-chairmen, David Keller and Shannon Corrigan, the Forecast Committee, including past committee chairmen, the entire NOMAR staff, and the NOMAR and CID boards of directors for their unwavering support. We began planning this year's event shortly after the end of the day cocktail reception last year. And for us volunteers, we strive to make each year better than the last. We strategically reviewed all the feedback you submitted and adjusted where we could. Your opinion matters. We're excited to offer a full 8 hours of continuing education credit through the Louisiana Real Estate Commission and the Louisiana Real Estate Appraisers Board. Backed by popular demand, we are again offering 2 types of tickets to accommodate your busy schedules while still fulfilling the deed and desire for continuing education credits. For this year's event, we're excited to have over 40 sponsored partners from across multiple real estate disciplines, including but not limited to appraisers, brokerages, banks, inspectors, law firms, mortgage lenders, roofers, and title companies, to name a few. With over 500 attendees and an impressive roster of sponsors, it's clear that interest in practical, relevant information remains high as the real estate market continues to face disruption and uncertainty. The committee would like to personally thank our returning presenting sponsor, Gulf Coast Bank and Trust Company, for their commitment again this year. Gulf Coast has been the key driver in our event's success for the past 8 years, and we are grateful for the opportunity to hear Guy Williams close the day with his ever thought-provoking remarks and his distinct brand of humor. Please be sure to visit all of our sponsors' tables during the breaks and lunch. For a full list of sponsors, please reference today's program. I would also like to take this time to thank our media partners, Gamble Communications, NOLA.com, and Biz New Orleans, as well as the team at Jefferson Performing Arts Center for being a great host for the 4th year in a row. We have an exciting and informative program today with a hand-selected group of subject matter experts. For each speaker and panel will be answering questions related to this year's theme, Breaking Ground, the Emergence of a New Economy. Through this frame, we hope to identify areas of growth and opportunity for the real estate industry in New Orleans and Louisiana. We are pleased to welcome former Jefferson Parish Sheriff and WWL radio host Newell Norman and as our keynote speaker following lunch. Additionally, he and his team will be streaming the Newell Norman Show live from the auditorium today. 15 years ago, when the Forecast Symposium was founded, we faced an industry landscape that was marked by an ongoing economic recovery from the 2008 crash and environmental recovery from Katrina. The forecast was born out of a need for us to come together and make sense of the rapid evolution of our conditions. Today, we find ourselves still recovering, albeit from different challenges, and yet we look forward to what the future holds as new ground is broken. Greater New Orleans is uniquely suited to adapt, thrive, and progress despite, and even sometimes because of, the challenges we face in today's market. That is what we as a community have always done. Notwithstanding the headwinds we're facing, we must look to and learn from business leaders in our community, like the ones here today, to tackle these problems directly and thoughtfully. I hope today gives you a few meaningful insights you can carry forward into your family life, your client relationships, and your business. We built in longer breaks in today's program, and it is our intent that this will foster the kind of enduring connections that are essential for building a thriving real estate business. Thank you for your attention and support of the New Orleans Metropolitan Association of Realtors and its companion, CID, as the voice for real estate in the greater New Orleans region.
Thank you, Mignon. All right, folks, before we begin our opening session, I'd like to turn everyone's attention to their program located in their bag. It's a pretty important piece. You'll also find You'll find out more information about today's speakers and sponsors. Also in your program, there's 3 important things that you need to know about. First, there is a perforated card in the front that we ask for your details and contact information, plus your license number. This is essential and required for you to receive the Louisiana Real Estate Commission's continuing education hours for the day. Please fill this form out, and as you exit for lunch, committee members will be stationed at all of the exits in the theater to collect them. Please be sure to return these before lunch, as they will not be accepted once we begin the final sessions of the day. Secondly, at the back page, you'll see a QR code right down here. That is, it's our partnership with Biz New Orleans Magazine, and today all attendees receive a 1-year print subscription to the magazine. You can redeem that subscription by scanning that QR code on the insert in the back of the program. And thirdly, the most important part, 2 drink tickets for the reception that we have later on for the networking reception after the session at 5 p.m. immediately following this program. Everybody's got it? We're all good? We're ready to go? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to session 1. How is the economy emerging? Sponsored by Colliers, Louisiana, a leading commercial real estate firm with global reach, local marketing expertise, and an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome regional economist from the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. Please welcome Dr. Gary Wagner.
Make sure I can get the slides here. Oh, good morning. It's nice to be with you. So I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to participate. I also want to thank NOMAR for sponsoring the event. I also wanted to point out that NOMAR has provided the multi-list data access to me, which allows this presentation to be possible. So unfortunately, I will not be able to hang around for most of the day. I have to head back to Lafayette later this morning for my day job. I have to teach this afternoon. So if you have any questions or would like the slides, feel free to email me. I realized this morning I should have put my email address on the slide, but you can find me pretty easily. If you Google Gary Wagner, Louisiana, my email address will pop up and I'll make the slides available to you. So what I want to talk about today is basically a couple points. I want to give you a deep dive into residential real estate conditions in the NOMAR region. Talk about what's really driving the residential market right now. I think there are kind of two factors at play that are both working in the same direction. We're seeing very weak demand and above average new listings, particularly within the last 6 months. And then the last thing I want to do is just finish up with a quick discussion of the interest rate outlook and what the Federal Reserve has signaled for the rest of 2025 and also going into 2026. So starting with sales, the pace of sales in the NOMAR region has been well below normal. So those blue bars are showing you the historical average number of closed sales by month. And when I'm looking at this historical average, I'm comparing it to the period from 2013 to 2019. So looking at the full history of sales in the region, that 2013 to 2019 period is basically a nice period of stability and growth for the NOMAR region. And you can see through 2025, the pace of sales has been somewhere around 990 per month. So it's been very stable throughout this year, but also well below normal pace. In percentage terms, what we've been seeing month by month through 2025 is that residential sales are somewhere between 15 and 20% below normal, meaning normal is that pace that we saw between 2013 and 2017. So two things to keep in mind throughout the presentation. When I refer to normal, I'm always referring to the period between 2013 and 2019. And then all the sales data that you see today is through the end of September. So it's as current as we could be. 2025 is almost a mirror image of what we saw last year. So this chart is going to show you just a comparison over sales by month for recent years. So that green line right there is the historical average from 2013 to 2019, about 1,200 sales per month. 2022 was really a banner year where sales were at the beginning of the year about 1,500. But you can see the pretty sharp decline in 2022, starting in March when the Federal Reserve started their tightening cycle to raise interest rates to fight that COVID-related inflation. 2023, we see further slowing of residential sales to where it dips below average in about May of the year. And then notice 2024 and 2025 have been essentially mirror images. So this is what we saw in 2024, sales about 15% below normal, and a continuation in 2025 where sales have been essentially the same pace. A little bit of an uptick there between August and September, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. But just to give you a comparison of how that stacks up through the last 25 years or so, this is annual sales through September 30th by year going back to the year 2000. So the highest points we had in the NOMAR region were in 2006 and in 2021 when sales were about 14,000 through September. You can see the lowest point we had was in 2010 when sales were about 7,200 through the month of September. And you can see we've just over 9,000 for 2025, which puts us exactly on pace with what we were seeing in 2024. So very much a continuation of what we've seen over the last 18 months or so. But to give you a closer look by parish, there's a lot of differences that we're seeing throughout the NOMAR region. So on average, sales are down about 15 to 20%. You can see in Washington Parish, sales are up about 5% over the last 18 months to compared to historical norms. In Plaquemines Parish, sales are up about 13% compared to historical norms. Around the rest of the region, sales are down basically between 13 and 33%. Compared to that 2013 to 2019 period. If you look at the map, you can see it's really Orleans Parish, St. James, and St. John that are kind of driving those largest reductions. So those are the parishes right now where we're seeing sales at paces that are well below historical norms. And I wanted to also show you the distribution of sales in the region as well to get a sense of which parishes are dominating the residential market at this point in time. I was a little surprised to see that St. Tammany is 28% of all the sales in the Nomar region over the past 18 months. You've got Jefferson and Orleans being basically half, but you take 4 parishes, so you have Jefferson, Orleans, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa. Those 4 parishes account for almost 90% of all the residential sales over the past 18 months. I want to talk a little bit about the demand side of the market. So those of you that are working in residential have probably felt this, but it's a little bit harder to track. So I would love to give you local information about the demand side of the market, but it's something that I don't have access to any data on. What I can do is kind of measure what's happening on the demand side from some national figures. And so this is something that's from the National Association of Home Builders. It's what they call their foot traffic index. So they survey builders, and they ask builders about how much foot traffic the builders are receiving in their sales offices. And they've tracked this going back to 1985. And so I'm showing you the full history of the data so you can kind of get a sense of where we are. And they ask them, is foot traffic normal? Is foot traffic above average? Is foot traffic below average? And I want to point out that the index now is about at a level of 20. And so you can see from the chart, there were essentially, if we remove COVID, there were only 2 other periods where foot traffic was lower than what we're seeing right now, which was the recession in 1991. We had a national recession in 1991. And also the 2008 financial crisis. So basically going back over the last 40 years, we're at the 3rd lowest point from what builders are telling us about interest in their sales offices. Another metric for looking at how buyers respond is, this is from the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, so I'm sure you probably have not seen this chart before. The University of Michigan produces a consumer sentiment survey where they ask a variety of questions, and they've done this for a very, very long time. You may have heard about the survey because the University of Michigan often asks about expectations for inflation. So that's kind of the most common way that you see these data being reported. But they also ask questions about whether or not buyers think it's a good time to buy or a bad time to buy. And again, these are national data, so they're not specific to Louisiana or the New Orleans area. But when I looked at the survey going back over time, right now we're at an all-time high for buyers reporting that this is quote-unquote a bad time to buy. They say it's a quote-unquote bad time to buy primarily for 2 reasons. One is tight lending conditions. The second would be high mortgage rates. If we look at surveys from the Federal Reserve, which I don't have a chart to show you, but we're also seeing that lending conditions are tightening compared to where they were a few years ago. I think this corresponds more closely with the increase in interest rates that we saw starting in 2022. You know, if we go back to, say, 1980, the increase in interest rates that we saw in 2022, 2023 was the 2nd most rapid tightening cycle the Federal Reserve had put in place in the last 40 years. And I think that sparked a lot of concern with buyers. It made buyers very hesitant, and we're seeing that huge spike up as buyers are reluctant to buy, thinking that it's not necessarily the best time. The good news is you can see it's a pretty sharp drop in the last 6 months or so. There also looks like there's going to be some relief from the Federal Reserve later this year and into next year, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But right now on the buying side, it's certainly very soft compared to what we've been seeing over the last 30 years. The last piece of evidence I'm going to talk about on the demand side is really looking at mortgage applications. So again, this is national data. I don't have anything state or local to provide you, but this is from the Mortgage Bankers Association. It's their purchase index. So they're tracking applications for single-family homes. And basically the way that you can interpret this, when the index is increasing, it means there are more mortgage applications for single-family homes. When the value is decreasing, mortgage applications for single-family homes are falling. So I wanted to point out this is showing you the last 25 years. So we're at the lowest point we've been in the last 25 years for mortgage applications. So probably not the best news. I think on the other hand, over the last 8 or 9 months, we've seen an uptick in mortgage applications for single-family homes. So hopefully we have rebounded and we've started the upswing. There's been a little bit of momentum here over the last 6 to 8 months that perhaps will carry us into more positive 2026. But getting back to the local market, So obviously when you have weak demand on the buying side, you're probably going to end up in a situation where you have excess inventory, and that's what this is showing you. So if you look, for example, at Orleans Parish, which right now has the largest gap in what I would call excess inventory, the average months of supply in Orleans is about 5.3. So that is using the period from 2013 to 2019. Currently, Orleans Parish is at 11 months of supply. So every parish in the region has excess inventory right now, some a little bit larger than others. And I'll talk about specifically where this excess inventory is coming from and then what effect it's having on prices and what I think it's going to have on prices in the near future. We're also seeing a lot of excess inventory at various price points. So looking at, say, 200,000 and up, we're seeing a lot of excess inventory. So higher price points right now have higher excess inventory than what's normal. So if you focus your attention all the way over to the right, so those are homes that are listed for $500,000 or more. So currently there are almost 1,600 properties in the Nomar region, residential properties listed at that price point. Historically, there are about 481. So quite a large excess amount across all of these different price points, which is consistent with what we're seeing in a lot of the other metrics for the region right now. I also want to talk about talk a little bit about new listings and what's happening. So this is showing you the typical number of new listings that come into the MLS system by month from 2013 to 2019. So just looking at the chart, for example, in January, we have just under 1,200 new listings on average per month. We see a big increase between February and March, where in March we have about 1,400 new listings per month on average. So this is what we saw in 2024. So new listings were a little bit below average throughout the year. Closer at the end of the year, October, November, December, we're very close to our historic norm. Here's what we're seeing in 2025. So a pretty big increase in new listings, specifically starting in February. And if you look at, say, April through September, every one of those months, the number of new homes listed for sale in the MLS has been well above the average over that period from 2013 to 2019. And in fact, if you look just at September, we had about 500 additional properties listed for sale in September than what we would typically see in a September month between 2013 and 2019. So if we go back to the last 6 months and we look at, say, April through September, we have about 1,500 new residential listings in the Nomar area that are above what we would normally see. So combine new listings being above normal and weak demand is probably not a recipe to see significant increases in price growth. But I'll talk about that in just a second. More specifically, where are these areas where we're seeing kind of new listings popping up? So in percentage terms, the two parishes that are seeing the largest amount of new listings would be Plaquemines Parish and Washington Parish. Again, those are relatively small shares of the entire Nomar region. And if you want to think about the 1,500 new listings that are above normal and where most of those are coming from, primarily it's in Orleans Parish and Tangipahoa. And I would say Orleans is really accounting for a very large share of those residential listings that are above normal. So that just means more new homes are being, I shouldn't say new, more new properties are being listed in Orleans Parish, well above what is historically the average for the region. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about prices. So this is median home price growth, so year over year, by month over that period from 2013 to 2019, which is historically our norm. And you can see year over year prices typically are in the 3.5% to 4.5% range. So this is the norm for the market. What we saw early in this year was pretty optimistic. So the first 3 months we saw year-over-year median prices increasing by 5.8% in January, 1.8% in March, so a little bit below normal. We hit a soft spot here in the center of the year. April, June, year-over-year prices were down just a little bit. We saw a nice rebound in September, where year-over-year prices were up about 4.1%. I think the thing to keep in mind is right now forces are kind of working against. Median price is increasing at the norm because we're not seeing a lot of demand on the buying side, and we're seeing a little bit of excess inventory compared to what's normal. So all things taken into consideration, I think median prices have actually held pretty firm over the last 12 months. Get this to work. There are a couple other margins that I think can be adjusted in addition to price, and I want to talk about those too, which would be concessions and also days on market. So this is showing you the fraction of all residential sales where sellers are offering some concessions to buyers. And you can see it's relatively flat at about 40%. So right now we're right at that normal point. About 42% of all sales are offering concessions. So that has not been increasing. This is a margin where we may see it increase if we don't have additional buyers coming into the market sometime soon. We saw a pretty big increase there in 2024, where sellers were offering, at that time, it was about 63% of all residential sales were offering concessions. Now we're back down to the normal of about 40%. We can also think about the dollar amount that sellers are offering as well. So this is the average concession amount as a percentage of the sales price. And again, it's showing you a long history so that you can see what's happening. It's typically around 1.5%. And right now we're at 1.3%. So again, the fraction of homes that are offering concessions is about normal. The dollar amount of those concessions is also about normal. So those are actually, I think, quite good metrics given what we're seeing on the demand side from consumers. The other margin that can be adjusted as well is looking at days on market. So I know this is a very busy chart. There's a lot going on. I can explain it to you pretty simply. Focus all the way over on the left and look at Jefferson Parish. So that black line is showing you the average days on market for a residential property over the period from 2013 to 2019. Again, kind of our baseline. Typically, homes would be on the market for about 31 days. The last three bars there are showing you what we actually observed in August, July, and September. So in August, the median home was listed for about 38 days. In July, it was 22, and in September, it was 27. So in other words, days on market outside of Orleans Parish are pretty close to historical norms. So we're not seeing additional concessions at this point. We're not seeing additional concession amounts increase at this point. We're also seeing days on market looking pretty close to our historical norms, despite the fact that inventory levels are rising relative to what we've seen in the past. The last thing I want to point out is just the Federal Reserve has signaled interest rate reductions through 2025 and into 2026. So that red line is what the federal funds interest rate currently is. So 4 times a year, the Federal Open Market Committee provides guidance about where they think interest rates will be at the end of the year. So the latest guidance was in September, so just last month. And you can see the 2025 number is at 3.6. That's 50 basis points or 25% rate cuts from where we are now. So last month, the Federal Reserve was signaling that they expect to cut interest rates 2 additional times this calendar year. You can see in 2026, they've got it signaled at 3.4%, which would say 1 additional cut in 2026. Going out to 2027 and 2028, you can see it's at 3.1. That's the interest rate the Federal Reserve considers to be neutral for the economy. So what that means is that interest rate is not stimulating the economy, nor is it working to slow the economy down. Any interest rate above 3.1% is going to be working to slow the economy down. The reason why the Federal Reserve raised interest rates was to fight the COVID-related inflation. So it looks like we will see at least some additional interest rate guidance or interest rate help this year. I think as a rule of thumb, you can basically add 2 to 2.5% to the numbers that you see on the chart, and that gives you a rough estimate of what we think mortgage rates might be. So going into, say, 2027, 2028, and you think, what's the normal long-term interest rate? Mortgage rate, probably somewhere around 5.25%. Prior to working for the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, I was vice president for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, so I've got a little bit of insight in what they do. The other thing I like to point out is they no longer call me and ask me for my opinion, so you can take that for what it's worth. But they are signaling at least some reductions. The one thing that I do want to point out quickly about what's happening with the Federal Reserve is normally when the economy is slowing, and we've seen slowing growth in the economy for the last 18 months, normally when we see slowing growth in the economy, that's a sign to increase interest rates. So the Federal Reserve has a dual mandate that was set by Congress. That dual mandate is to maximize employment and to maintain price stability. So normally those two things work in conjunction with one another. So when the economy is slowing, we don't see signs of inflation, so it's a very clear signal to cut interest rates. It's a little bit different right now because we're seeing employment numbers slowing, but we're seeing inflation above normal and potentially re-accelerating. So that means the Federal Reserve's got a really tricky question about whether or not you think inflation is going to re-accelerate, which would point to not cutting interest rates, or you think that inflation is going to continue to fall, in which case it points to reducing interest rates. So it's not always clear what they're going to do, but they've at least signaled for the near term that they expect to lower interest rates a little bit, which will provide a little bit more ease for buyers. So just to kind of quickly summarize here, I mean, inventory levels are well above normal. So if you were here last year for my presentation, it was very much a similar story. I think it's mainly due to two different factors. We're seeing depressed sales, but we're also seeing a pretty rapid increase in new listings in some particular areas, Orleans Parish being one in particular. I think on the positive side, we're going to get some interest rate relief. I do worry a little bit if we don't see an increase in buyers that we're going to see some very sluggish prices and probably more seller concessions. So the only margins you can really adjust to see inventory levels return to normal, we can see prices potentially falling, we can see sellers offering more concessions, we can see the amount of those concessions increasing. So far in 2025, that has not really happened, but if we don't see an uptick in the number of buyers, I would expect to see a much stronger pressure on prices and concessions, and I would think you're going to see those at higher price points because those are the particular segments of the market where we're seeing a lot of excess inventory. And that's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Vice President at Colliers, Mr. Bret Swango.
Hey, everyone. Let's see if we can figure out. All right, clicker works. Maybe. All right, beautiful. Appreciate the opportunity. Bret Swango, as you mentioned, I lead what we call location intelligence and workforce analytics at Colliers. The title of my presentation is New Tools, New Rules, New Orleans. And so before I get in, just a little context on what my role is. So at Colliers, I think we're the third largest global commercial real estate firm, and I lead, it's almost like a for-profit research organization. So we are both doing a lot of macro research to understand how is the world changing, how does that translate to various property types and various geographies? And then how do we use that information to advise, be they users, be they investors, as to where they should think about buying or operating around the country. But we're also actively, tactically working on deals. So right now we're working on anything from a $450 million jet engine testing project where we're helping them decide where to put that job with that facility with 2,000 jobs. To a vertical indoor farming operation. So what I'm going to try to share, and this will be, try to condense about a 50-minute presentation to about 25 here. I'm going to share with you some of the new rules that we're seeing, the new tools that we think are going to be driving this emerging economy that you guys are here to talk about today. And I want to start with, I use this in every single presentation I give, and it's Peter Drucker, kind of the father of modern management. One of his quotes was, "The most dangerous thing in business is finding the right answer to the wrong question." I understand this market has a lot of generalists in the real estate world who touch a lot of different things. So this is going to be a lot of information around a lot of things that you're probably like, hey, how does this directly tie to what I do every day? I don't have the answers to that. I always say it's kind of like, with playing with my little nieces and nephews, like those like connect the dots puzzles. From the clients you're talking to, the things you're seeing, the things you're hearing, what you're reading in the Wall Street Journal, those are all dots. I'm hoping to give you a few more of those today in a fairly rapid sequence. So what are the tools? Artificial intelligence, it's the title of the day. I think the top 3 articles today in the Wall Street Journal were somehow tied to AI. So I'm going to touch on that a bit. The rules, that's really about deglobalization and shifting demographics. So, there we go. So AI. So first I'll set this up with a story. So my grandfather taught my Sunday school in the little town of 225 people where I grew up in central Illinois. And usually I was the only person there. So Sunday school is really a lot of storytelling. And I explicitly remember him telling me multiple times about the first time he ever saw a television or heard a radio. And he passed away in December of 2022, actually December 29th, 30 days after ChatGPT was released. So the reason I say that is a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is what the world looks like going forward. But just to conceptualize that in one human's lifetime, we went from the advent of effectively these seemingly archaic technologies now of television and radio to artificial intelligence, and just the understanding of the slope of that curve is something that I'm spending a lot of my time, and our team is spending a lot of our time trying to focus on. And as Sundar Pichai put it, AI could have implications for humanity that are more profound than electricity or fire. Pretty broad claim. So by the numbers, and I know this is a lot, but Chamath Palihapitiya, one of the first employees at Facebook, kind of a thought leader in the AI arena, he put this out in 2024, and he said, just to do some math on how fast this world is evolving, if the chips are improving at 2x a year, the models are improving at 2x a year, and the CapEx is improving at 10x a year, 2 times 2 is 4 times 10 equals 40. So you're seeing a 40x year-over-year improvement. So you do that for 2 years and you're at 1,600x, or 160,000%. So just like, I bring that up because I know we're here kind of talk about labor and how the world is changing, but I think the magnitude of this, the more information I have, and I spent 3 weeks in Silicon Valley in March of 23 when I realized how big I thought this was going to be, and the more information I have, the more profound I think it's going to be. Elon Musk, just another well-recognized name, says that he basically sees the artificial intelligence compute coming online appears to be increasing at a factor of 10 every 6 months. So that would say 100x annually. So again, just historically unprecedented rates of change. How is that playing out? Like you call it the macro narrative. How are we seeing that play out in the numbers? So AI coding. So in 2023, 3% of code was written by AI. In 2024, 70% of code was written by AI. You hear about a lot of what it's going to do in the healthcare arena, what that means for longevity, what that means for, the impact of the increased lifespans on real estate market dynamics is something that I'm still trying to get my head around. But drug target hypothesis testing, 20 drugs discovered using artificial intelligence in 2023, they 10x that in 2024. Global market for AI, again, these numbers are changing all the time, but what I want you to take here is it's nonlinear, right? Sub 200 billion in 2024, north of 800 billion according to this. I think they just updated this to say it's $1 trillion market by 2030. Basically an 80% CAGR, which, again, for an industry that we're usually looking at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% annual growth, again, just kind of speaks to the scale. I won't get into this. Punchline, and there was a big article today out in the Wall Street Journal about this. I didn't even get all the way through it. I'm heading to the Utility Economic Development Association event in northern Michigan actually after this. And what you see here on the left is U.S. electricity consumption. And the punchline there is that we've effectively been flat for the first quarter of this century. For the next 5 years, we're expected to increase that demand about 3 to 5x what we have in the last 25 years combined. So again, just kind of further painting some numbers around that. This is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they basically publish a 5-year forecast. And so in 2022, they said, hey, out 5 years, we're going to need another 23 gigawatts. The next year, 2023, they said, well, 2028, we're going to need another 40 gigawatts. So again, basically doubling it. And then last year when they came out with this, they basically said, hey, we're going to need 120 additional gigawatts. So, I became I run also our labor analytics group. Started that stuff in 2017, 18, just because it was like, hey, this is the most important thing that people have the least amount of information on. And now I would argue that most important thing is power, which I think this region, and again, you all know better than I, is very well positioned in terms of both the energy affordability and also the role that you play in that space. Don't take my word for it. This is Jonathan Gray, CEO of Blackstone. This is less than or maybe 10-day-old presentation. I would encourage you all to go out and find it. He basically says they're seeing a 40% increase in demand for U.S. electricity over the next 10 years. Again, historically unprecedented. You're also working with utilities who are effectively like, call it like pseudo-governmental entities. So the speed at which they're used to moving versus the speed at which we need to move in order to be competitive on a global scale is, I think, something that's going to get an increased amount of attention. President Trump released, I don't remember the name of it, but it was basically like the AI Supremacy Act, or some term of AI, combination of AI and supremacy. If you Google it, came out in July, right around the time of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and he basically said, every manufacturing facility, every data center should have on-site generation. That will be a profound, I can't wait to hear what my colleagues at the Utility Economic Development Association say about that in the coming weeks, because on-site generation was almost a 4-letter word for them when that came up last year. So to see that that's now being pushed, and I mean, you look at Bloom Energy, you look at Oklo or whatever it said, and look at what their stock price has done in the last 6 months. Again, it's parabolic. And so who are going to be, again, so, okay, here's the macro shift, and then what asset classes are going to be impacted. I'll touch on in a minute, but the other piece we always try to hit on is, okay, what geographies are the relative winners and losers? So the majority of that demand is actually ERCOT, which is Texas, and PJM, which is, kind of outside of Alexandria, DC, the kind of the origin of the data center space, and then also that encompasses Columbus, which is kind of the new boom bastion, and then Pennsylvania as well with a lot of their natural gas. They've seen a ton of activity. So I spent the majority of my time is in industrial, and so a lot of times I'll tell the story with industrial brokers, like, okay, what does this mean to me? Well, this is a picture I took of a facility. I was touring in Memphis with a solar cell manufacturer. It's about a 750,000 square foot facility right next to both a gas plant as well as I don't remember what the capacity was in sewer and water, but I'll call it tremendous infrastructure. We were negotiating with these guys. They bought it in December of 23. They paid $35 million for it. They paid sub $50 a foot for that facility. We get a call and they'd say, hey, actually that product's off the market. And we're like, okay, well, let's talk. We need to move fast. It was a Chinese group who was looking to come over here and chasing tax credits, so speed to market was super critical. I'm like, okay, let's talk numbers. They go, you're not going to compete with who we're working with. And then they effectively hung up the phone. Well, it was Elon Musk and XAI. So who they since have invested $3 billion into a facility that they don't own. So, whatever that math is, 100x plus or minus into a facility that they didn't own that these guys bought for $45 a foot, less than 2 years ago. That's how fast this space is changing. So takeaway for me is powered land is a whole different value. It has a whole different value proposition. Existing manufacturing assets and infrastructure has a whole different value proposition in the market today than it used to. Again, okay, you read a lot about, what is the impact of AI, so maybe nothing hyper new here, but, effectively the punchline is that the more education you have, the more exposed you are to AI potentially, coming for your job. I have very good news for the folks in the room. So the raw material for artificial intelligence, which is why it's coming after legal, it's coming after healthcare, it's coming after finance, is it needs large volumes of relatively homogeneous data. What does the real estate, especially the commercial real estate industry, not have? Large volumes of homogeneous data. So I honestly think that the real estate industry is about as insulated as anybody, even though I'm sure you look at your day-to-day job and you're like, okay, there's so many elements of this process that can be improved. Yeah, there's gonna be some of that, but the underlying opportunity in the space is still incredibly rich, and it's as insulated as anywhere. Look at the displacement by industry by 2032. Again, all major white-collar occupations. I'll touch on remember this when I start talking about, I've got a little bit, remember that last new in this is New Orleans. I've got a few slides on just, call it the market here locally, what's driving demand. And remember this one. Transportation and warehousing, much less impact. Mining, quarrying, oil and gas, which this economy is obviously very reliant on, much less impact. So here's we're in a paradoxical world, is what I say. I don't know if anybody remembers 2022, what was the number one shortage that we had in the labor market? It was truck drivers. What was the one occupation that everybody's like, there's no way that's gonna be around in 20 years? Truck drivers. So it's like, there's that paradox. Well, here, this is from the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report. I would encourage you, if you've got, honestly, everybody should read it or at least glance at it. If you've got young kids, I would highly encourage you to look into it. So this is the fastest growing and fastest declining jobs over the next 5 years. Basically, the blue bar is good. So fastest growing, big data specialist. In the same report, current capacity for substitution by generative AI by skill group. Guess what was number one? Artificial intelligence and big data. So if you have the skill set that's most in demand, you're at the greatest risk of replacement by AI. So I say that to say that just like the paradoxical world that we're in today, I think I have a whole nother spiel on how I think the education system's gonna have to adapt to keep up with that. Just again, so how does this manifest itself in terms of where companies are thinking about locating, where is that talent? Again, the key call out here is that San Francisco, obviously, 50% greater than basically any other market. But Ann Arbor, Pittsburgh, Austin, a lot of college towns, and it is a much younger demographic on average where companies are finding this talent. This is another one, and by the way, I should have said this. I'll have a little link here on my LinkedIn for my LinkedIn. Feel free to send me an email. It's Bret with 1T. Swango. It'll be in the last slide at Colliers.com if you want this deck. I post this stuff on LinkedIn with a little bit of commentary about once a week. But basically, this was a great breakdown from Oxford Economics of basically the impact based on some of that job-related data that I shared previously. What asset classes are going to be most impacted based on where those people actually typically perform that work? Again, no major surprise in office. Maybe a little more of a surprise in life science, and then the other one is manufacturing, and I'll get into that in a minute here. But you can see kind of across the board what the relative impact is to those segments, and consequently what we may see some the impact in terms of demand. I don't know where I'm supposed to point this thing. Maybe I got a dead battery because the same button is not working. All right. Anyway, AI's rapid adoption. The punchline is that it's driven by cost efficiency. So historically, a lot of technology investment is about growth into the future. I don't want to get too far into this, but when interest rates are high, like was talked about previously, companies are more focused on profitability, because if you're running that net present value of their future cash flows, if you're not making money till way out in the end, it hurts you a lot more than if you're making it today. So profitability is a bigger focus. If interest rates are low, you're more focused on growth. So it's like, wait, why is all this capital being spent? Why is there this rapid investment in AI? Well, most of the tools the areas that it's being implemented are tied to reductions in cost. So enhancing that profitability. This is another CEO survey from Deloitte. Where are you gonna be implementing AI? Increase efficiencies, automate manual tasks, reduce business operating cost. And then last slide on this, and we'll get into some labor stuff, but this is a really big deal that I think is probably fairly underreported. If you want to go, what's happening in Ukraine is it's a devastating and terrible circumstance, but the wild thing about it is you can actually, we're in the 2020s, so you can actually watch like pseudo-live footage from war. Go back and watch footage from when that war started in 2022 in the pre-AI era. Now go and watch it today. And it was humans in 2022, and it's robots and drones now. And I don't know what the exact numbers on this are. I think 80% of the drone production in the world takes place in China. China also did they did more than double the number of industrial robot installations of us and our key allies combined. So, who knows what the future looks like. I did see a reference to something I thought was pretty good. They talked about the United States now as a pre-war economy. I'm not suggesting that. I just thought it's a good way to think about where a lot of capital is going. And if that is the case, and if the rules of the game are changing the way they seem to be, and you're able to watch it play out, what are the implications? Again, I'm going to kind of hose through these, but so Ray Dalio ran the largest hedge fund in the world. Demographics are the most important factor that will drive the global economy over the next 30 years. That was about a 2-year-old quote. I think I slightly disagree with him based on those other slides I just shared, but I'd say it's the second most important thing. So what does that mean? 1960, right? So I imagine some people in this room were born in 1960. Since then, the global population has nearly tripled, right? So we hit 8 billion in 2022. we're only ever going to hit 10.4 billion before we hit peak population. We've added 2.4 billion since 1994. So another way to say that is we've added as many people since 1994 as we're ever going to add globally, and basically 100% of that growth is in Africa. And if you read some of the headlines on where we're positioned well versus some of our competitors geopolitically and the role that Africa is going to play in that, that's another thing I would just say to keep in mind. And again, I think the key takeaway for the people in the room is like, hey, many of us have worked in an economy and in a country where you could kind of bank on 1, 2, 3, 4% population growth. And usually when you were, COVID was a little crazy, but when you were underwriting your real estate models, what did you underwrite for? You were underwriting 1, 2, 3, 4% rent growth. Well, that was obviously tied to a 1, 2, 3% population growth. What does that rent growth look like when demand doesn't grow at anywhere near the rate it historically has? The labor market, people ask me a lot, hey, the labor market's terrible. It's kind of like saying the industrial market on a national basis is terrible right now. It's like, yeah, it's not as good as it was in 22 and 21 when it was at historic highs, but on a relative basis, this is the Kansas City Fed labor market conditions index. Anything over 0 is like better than historical norms. You can see we're coming off of our highs, but still well above 0. This is the quits rate, one of the best indicators of hey, you're not quitting your job if there's not another job for you. So it's a pretty good it's like one of my favorite, if you're gonna look at one metric and see where do things sit relative to where they have sat. We're not even where, it's below where it was in, kind of pre-COVID. So again, it's not super rosy. There's obviously competition coming from technology in a lot of arenas, but it's not all doom and gloom. And obviously, there has still been some growth from that first topic that we talked about, which is AI. I'm going to kind of fly through this one. This is effectively a CEO U.S. Employment Sentiment Index. Total non-farm payrolls are at the top blue line over here, so basically generally positive, but for COVID. And this is U.S. CEO Employment Sub-Index. And effectively what that means is probably a better way to show it over here, is they ask a set of questions about sales, about capital spending, about your company's expectations for future employment over the next 6 months. You look at what CEOs said. This is Q3 2025. What did they say about sales? Basically, historical average. What did they say about capital spending? Effectively, historical average. What did they say about employment? Way below the historical average. Right, so that's, again, forward-looking. What CEOs are thinking anyway is that it probably is going to be continued slack coming in the labor market. I'll just call this, I'm running short on time here, so I'm just going to call this, focus on this bottom line. Where is that long-term unemployment? Again, goes back to those things that we talked about with AI. It's largely in the college-educated labor pool. You can see what long-term unemployment has done down there. It's been historically increasing, really since the late 2000s. This one's pretty important. I think it ties into the last story that was being told regarding, your guys' position, multifamily, single family, the ballooning cost of the American dream. I used to say, 2 years ago, I said this is the most important thing. I think it's still very important. I think a couple of the other things that I've maybe spoken about earlier are as important, but we are a democracy, so inherently a democracy is solving for the 51st percentile. This is a chart from the Wall Street Journal, household income required to afford the typical U.S. home. In January of 2012, so I was working at this time, it was $40,000, which I can't even almost imagine. So that's how much you had to make in order to be able to afford the typical American home. Today, that's almost $130,000. So it's more than 3x in 12 years. Consequently, the share of U.S. households that can afford the median home that was listed for sale has gone from basically 50% of people could afford the median home that was listed for sale in 2013. Today, that's closer to 16%, or 1 in 6. So the affordability deterioration in this country is something that, mark my words, if this is not a major issue for 28, this will be a major issue for 2032, like universal basic income style major issue in 2032. So again, that's the thing. How does that translate to where? And when we're talking to companies and investors, this is a graph of the shift in affordability from 2019 to 2023 across the top 50 markets in the US. Basically, only 3 markets got more affordable when you looked at incomes and housing cost. San Francisco, Minneapolis, New Orleans. So that is a very, very positive, and again, I showed kind of the, hey, here's the top markets for home appreciation in 2022. They were all these growth Sunbelt markets. Well, look at where the top markets are. So 25 is this teal color, 24 in terms of the top markets for home appreciation according to Zillow. It's, you know, the affordability belt is what we call it. It's basically like, hey, people are looking for affordable, the Rust Belt. So again, I think all that is very net positive. Last kind of little piece here, because I know I'm short on time. Deglobalization, most important trend facing investors today. You know, these are all also interrelated. I shouldn't ask this. I'm going to ask this question real quick. Can somebody just throw out a number? What % of domestic manufacturers do you think in a recent survey said that tariffs have been good for their business? Just throw out a number. Okay, you guys are better than I thought. I was blown away at this number. It was less than 4%. And again, I think part of that, you know, and again, it's a negotiation. The people in this room, I think, can appreciate the tactics of a negotiation as well as anybody. What looks good or bad in the short term may well be good in the long term. The other call out I'll have here is, you know, how do people in these 24 countries view the United States? I'm dating, my girlfriend's from Toronto, and I gotta tell you, like it is, and as you spend more time overseas, which I've done a lot more over the last couple of years, it's very eye-opening to see the way people view the United States. It's much less Toby Keith than what I'm used to listening to. But so this basically says who views the US more favorable, who views us effectively equal, and who views us less favorable. Canada is on the lower end of the as favorable as China. Canada effectively views the United States, our neighbor, or one of our strongest trade partners, is effectively the same from a geopolitical perspective is China. Mexico, of the countries surveyed, was the least favorable towards the United States and the most favorable towards China. And if you go back a year and where all our trade and growth and manufacturing was going to come from, it's Mexico. Also, there's a couple important African countries in terms of the rare earths, Nigeria, Kenya, also towards the bottom of this list. Just things to put on the radar. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I'm not going to go into these. Punchline with this is opportunity zones, new market tax credits. If you've got a group who's looking at opening a new location, you're talking about anywhere from a 10 to 25%, whether it's a cost of capital, like equity in the deal, or lowering like the rent constant if you're doing a build to suit. Implications for those, the permanent depreciation of qualified equipment, 100% expensing of qualified production property. What this means is you can, and you should know that if anybody's got a listing of a warehouse, if that warehouse was never used for manufacturing, and it's now purchased and it's used for manufacturing, that can be 100% expensed in year one. An existing building. Now, unfortunately, if the building was previously manufacturing, it doesn't actually qualify for that. You know, what matters to CEOs when they're onshoring operations? So again, these are the things CEOs are solving for. It's labor availability, it's cost. When you talk to site selectors and corporates, what are the most important things to them? Energy availability, available land, skilled labor. Again, energy availability, very net positive for your market. Land availability, net positive for your market. Skilled labor, I'll touch on that very quickly in a second. Where have these groups located? So where have been the biggest beneficiaries of onshoring projects in the last year? I highlighted the markets that have the densest concentration of manufacturing talent. That's what's outlined here. You can see 8 of the top 10 markets for onshoring jobs were in those markets. So what that means is people that are coming here, the new manufacturing roles are going into the historical manufacturing markets where you have infrastructure, where you have skill sets. This is, $100 million plus projects post-COVID. You can see that affordability belt narrative, that, kind of area that I highlighted for manufacturing, like a lot of the same story there. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up with just a little Dorothy Gale, no place like home. Touch on New Orleans. So the Gulf area. So this is like New Orleans, Biloxi, Mobile, kind of MSAs. Looking at FDI deal volume, not perfect, but a decent proxy. A lot of basic materials, very resilient in the food and drink, very resilient industries in aerospace and defense. I would argue that historically materials and industrial goods were considered, like those are pretty cyclical. But there's a structural shift right now. If you saw the announcement from Jamie Dimon 2 days ago, that they're setting aside, it's like a global or a U.S. resilience and security like initiative. They're setting aside $1.5 trillion to help with the onshoring of some of these critical components that go into the things that we talked about previously. So I would argue that basic materials and industrial goods in many ways there's a structural tailwind of that make them much less cyclical than they've historically been. This is specific to those markets, 21, 22, 23, 24. More than half of the projects that have landed have been either chemicals, metals, or food. So again, I think generally resilient segments. I won't get into this one, but this is just basically a quick look at, hey, when we look at the general occupations in the New Orleans and greater New Orleans area, you know, where are you most dense? Where are you least dense on a per capita basis? So basically concentration, 1 is the national average. So anything above this line, you have a greater density of per capita than anything below the line. The punchline is that, you know, you're over-indexed on legal, maintenance and repair. That's like one of the hardest labor pools for us to find when we're doing manufacturing projects. Engineering talent, another key labor pool. So again, you've got 12% more engineering talent, 25% more maintenance and repair talent. That's going to bode very well. You don't have as much of these like high-paying white collar, but again, if you look at who was most exposed to that this AI boom, it's those high-paying white collars. So again, I think you guys are, because of the relative affordability, I mean, I've goosebumps saying it. I really am very, very, very bullish on this pocket of the country. Where you sit, the chemical exposure, or the chemical industry, the energy industry, and the role that it's going to play in our country's, you know, I'll call it the next generation, or what do we call it? What was the name of this thing? The emergence of a new economy. I think you're very well positioned for that. So, and then the last quote I'll leave you with is, you know, and I encourage you all, like this AI thing is coming, lean into that, get your kids to lean into it. You should be using it every day. But I really do sincerely believe there's never been more opportunity. It's never been easier. I said this to one of my guys that worked for me the other day. It's never been easier to be 80th percentile in whatever you do than today, because you literally have the smartest thing that's ever existed at your fingertips. It's just, do you know how to ask it questions the right way? So the gap between the market solutions and technology's current capabilities has never been greater, but within that gap lies what I sincerely believe is historically unprecedented opportunity. Thank you guys very much. I apologize for running a couple minutes long.
All right, thank you again, Bret. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our second session of the day. Today's session is a panel of esteemed local professionals offering their expertise on why break ground in greater New Orleans and Louisiana. This session is sponsored by Zero Latency VR, a global provider offering the best virtual reality experience. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Hecht of GNO Inc., Ileana Ledet from Louisiana Economic Development, and from NOLA.com, Ms. Stephanie Riegel.
That's awkward. My avatar and I are wearing the same outfit. How embarrassing.
Well, so happy to be here, and we were going to sing and dance for y'all, but we're just going to get started in what will no doubt be a riveting discussion with Michael and Ileana, who I've had the pleasure of working with on a number of occasions. And the topic of this panel, Why Break Ground in New Orleans and Louisiana, is one that could probably keep us here all day, and so many layers to it. But let's start out on the positive. What are some of the key competitive advantages that we have here locally and statewide?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Stephanie, Ileana. There are a number of things you could say are competitive advantages, but some of them could be transitory, like current political alignment and LED. I do think we have the best economic development team, from the governor to LED down to the regions we've ever had. But the main thing is that there are two meta trends or mega trends, I guess they're meta trends, in the world that Louisiana is incredibly well positioned for. So one is that the demand for energy is going to keep going up like that, or I guess to you guys up like that. Gotta make sure I don't do an Elon Musk here. Thank you. That's because a single ChatGPT search takes 17 times the energy of a Google search, and then it lies to you like a 4-year-old. But that's not going to change. So the energy demands in the world between AI and electrification are going to keep going up. At the same time, the demand for that energy to be produced in a way that is lower impact on the environment, lower carbon, that also is going to continue unabated. You can talk to the heads of the super majors like Shell and Exxon, and with the exception of Saudi Aramco, all of them agree that we're going to be in a lower carbon environment going forward. So why does Louisiana have a competitive advantage there? It's because, one, we've got super cheap natural gas, and that's because of fracking, which, by the way, was invented by the guy who built the Woodlands outside Houston. You know, a little fun fact. But then the second thing is that carbon capture, carbon sequestration, which is the way that you use that cheap natural gas in a way that it doesn't get into the atmosphere, is something that Louisiana is particularly well suited for because we've got the pipelines, because we've got the expertise, but also because we've got the old oil wells where you can do it, and the clay formation and the salt domes that give you natural places to store the carbon. So we actually are I think arguably the best place in the country to do carbon capture and reuse of the carbon. And so that's why we are getting these, really tens of billions of investment. And I think that's what's going to take us back to being a leading state.
And Ileana, what are some of the talking points that you all sell to companies that are looking to invest here in terms of the built environment and infrastructure?
Yeah, so when companies come to Louisiana, they're familiar with our geography. They know that we have the river, our pipelines, we have like 50,000 miles of pipeline, and also it's very dense. Our railroad connectivity is very strong, so they know we have the infrastructure and our location in terms of being a port city along the Gulf Coast. All of those things are assets that we have in terms of our infrastructure. Beyond that, just this week, I was talking to a site selector, and those are the people that companies hire to help them make investment decisions and comparing one location versus another. And a site selector, and then an Australian company that is making significant investments in Louisiana. And on 2 separate occasions, they cited our tax policy as one of the primary reasons that they're excited about coming to Louisiana. And so we talked a lot about this at the end about a year ago with the legislature enacting these tax changes, but it is making a significant difference in companies' decisions. So you're looking at a place where we have some natural geographic advantage, but also in terms of our tax policy. And real quick, that individual income tax coming down to 3%, second lowest in the country among states that have income tax, is a selling point. Not just for companies, our corporate income tax rates came down as well. So you have lower operating costs, but also when they're looking at bringing people here, they're going to see bigger paychecks as a result of that lower income tax. So that's also a selling point for our companies coming
And you
here.
really are seeing differences around that in terms of the way people view Louisiana.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we track in terms of where we are in terms of investment, and it's a gigantic number when you look at how much investment announced projects there have been since January of 2024, approaching $70 billion, which is it's a much faster trajectory than we've seen traditionally over the last few years. So our policies, our alignment that Michael alluded to, they're making companies make those decisions quicker, and we're seeing the results in dollars and jobs.
How are regional and state level economic development strategies really helping attract companies? And not just industry, because industry's strong for all the reasons we just mentioned, but in terms of commercial or other types of industry sectors, what strategies does LED or GNO Inc. have that you're rolling out and actively pushing right now?
Yeah, so in terms of commercial and in terms of Main Street, we actually started a program about 3 or 4 years ago, basically so I could stop having lunch with Mike Siegel to talk about it. It's a joke. We can laugh at these things. Is Mike here? No. It's called the Professional Jobs Plan. And this was about marketing to companies to come and fill our office towers on Poydras and on Causeway and on Vets. And so part of it was talking about our favorable rates, but a lot of it was about talking to headquarter companies that were operating in the state and making the argument that you wanted to be somewhere in downtown New Orleans, downtown Jefferson, because of the airport access and because of the other amenities. So some examples of that recently is Delta Utilities, which bought the gas portion of Entergy's business going into Place St. Charles. They signed, I think, the largest lease that we've seen there in a while. There's a gaming company or a testing company called DAQA, D-A-Q-A, that just expanded to 100 individuals. We have Capado, which is a company that has expanded here from Chicago that's gone up to 100 individuals. DXC is never going to hit the 2,000 that we originally were forecasting for it, but it is going to be at about 300 people in the building there. And
Wait, I'm sorry. Is that for true? Like, I keep hearing that DXC is gone.
What's that?
DXC is gone. That's what I have heard.
Oh, no. DXC literally just built a new recruiting app for us that they're presenting. I'll show it to you for the NOPD with their team. No, so they're very much here. They're still kind of coming back to office, but they're not going to, that 2,000 thing that was announced that, that got capadoed. Whatever it is. Yeah, so we're selling hard, and look, we have challenges with our downtowns, but our vacancy rate is about 13%. The national rate's about 20%, 21%. So we're relatively doing better.
And what about at the state level in terms of strategies that LED is using to attract industry of all types?
A couple of different ways. I'll just highlight two specific in terms of our international strategy. So we've always had folks, visiting with folks internationally, seeing what the strongest prospects are, but we've been more intentional in terms of which countries, which regions we are working with, and what companies have interests that align with the assets and the strengths that we have. So focusing on Europe, focusing on Australia, we've seen significant investment from there, but specific areas, so we're focused on where there's alignment, not just like, blasting internationally. So a more targeted approach internationally. And along with that, on the flip side, looking at what we're doing here, and if you hear the Secretary of Economic Development speak, she always talks about changing the narrative. That has been one of her strategies in speaking to folks and how it is that we talk about Louisiana, both internally, folks in this room, and also conveying that message to national audiences. So there has been an opportunity campaign that we have launched, and you might have seen the ads airing here in the state to help spread the message on what the opportunities are here, because you'll often see folks who are graduating from college who are looking for opportunities here. They want to stay here, but the jobs that they're seeking, perhaps it's white-collar jobs, professional services, tech jobs, they haven't been here traditionally for a long time for some of those graduates who want to build their lives here for various reasons. So the opportunity campaign, targeting some internal audiences, and then moving beyond that to attracting folks from other states.
And can I just add one thing to this? So this more targeted approach that Ileana's talking about is a real thing. Traditionally, a lot of these overseas trips that have been taken by, I think it's fair, by the state, by locals, have been pretty boondoggly. The ones that are happening now are very focused, very intentional. I'll give you an example. We went to Australia 6 months ago. We already have had 2 companies come to the state as a result of them. One is a LNG company, Woodlands, that's going into the Lake Charles area. I think that's a $17 billion announcement. The other one that's coming to our region is a lithium company that makes batteries. and they're looking at coming and operating now in the GNO region. And that is, when you talk about how you measure return on these things, that's what you want to see. If you don't see that over time, you shouldn't be doing it.
And then there was South Korea last year, of course.
Exactly.
South Korea, Hyundai, and then it's reciprocal. I'm going out in a couple weeks to Denmark. This is being totally paid for by the Danish government, the flights, the accommodation, the room and board, everything, because they want us to be working with their companies like Ørsted, like Maersk, that are in the energy and trade sector, because they recognize that Louisiana is a good partner. So over time, these are not sister city agreements. These are economic development partnerships.
And can I just add one point on what Michael was saying about LNG? You hear about LNG, if you're not in that world, you're not like, how does that impact me? How does this impact folks in the street? The types of jobs created by these LNG facilities and the salaries that they are paying are way above the parish averages. And so when you bring those types of jobs in, you're bringing in folks who are going to have more disposable income that is going to, reverberate through the economy, through service industries, through different industries. So that's why we get, these massive investments, but also the types of jobs they're bringing in are really exciting for Louisiana.
And are there strategies active right now to diversify beyond manufacturing and industry LNG plants? I mean, tech was a big focus 10, 15 years ago, and it's
been ish. So let's talk about tech. Tech has been a focus and kind of obsession of mine. I mean, since the early days. Louisiana has the best digital media incentive in North America, arguably, 25% cash back. It has been a slower ramp than we expected giving that, but it is continuing to ramp up. We're seeing continued growth in video game companies. For example, high voltage software. If anybody knows the game Fortnite that our kids play, there was this thing a few years ago where Travis Scott had a concert inside the game. I don't know exactly what that means, but that was coded in New Orleans. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in defense tech, so the tech thing is going, but slower. The one that's really booming now is shipbuilding. I was with Ben Bordelon at an event at LED a couple days ago. They just got a massive contract with Finland to build 11 ice cutters. They're also building platforms for spaceships to land on. Schwest is building crew vessels for wind farms, which are, despite the bump because the president thinks they're ugly, that's gonna come back. Metal Shark is doing a lot of stuff with autonomous vessels. There's a company called Saronic that just came here from Austin, that's in Franklin over near Lafayette, that's building autonomous vessels to blow stuff up. So that's building stuff and then blowing it up is going well. And then on the bio side, I just can't say enough about what Auctioner Health Systems continues to do, along with LCMC, the new neuroscience center, the Bobby Patrick one over on River Road. Off on Jeff Highway is about to open.
I want to piggyback on something. I'm sorry, you want to go ahead?
About the strategy on diversification. I just wanted to hit on a specific strategy in terms of a new program that we rolled out on July 1st, which is the High Impact Jobs Program. So it is an incentive for jobs created that pay above a parish wage. And that replaces an older program that we had called Quality Jobs that focused largely on manufacturing types of jobs. What we were looking at with the High Impact was incentivizing higher paying jobs in professional services, in tech. And really, it was building upon the digital media credit that Michael mentioned, because companies would say, we put the jobs here in New Orleans, in this region, in Louisiana, because their digital media credit is so strong. So we looked at that, and that was really influencing companies' decisions. And so we looked at the High Impact Program in terms of once a company pays those wages for 12 years above a parish wage, they're eligible for a grant. But it has broader, it's a higher threshold for companies, but it also has broader eligibility in order to encourage that diversification and have more types of jobs be eligible.
That's great. I want to go back to something you mentioned, Michael, when you said the wind farms, because, Louisiana's all energy strategy under John Bell Edwards and over the past few years, to me, just was brilliant and signaled so much hope. We could have the old, we could have the new, and everything in between, and our infrastructure, because of the pipelines, enabled us to do both. And his policies have been very anti-renewable, and a lot of the business leaders have been very reticent to criticize it, and they keep saying things to us reporters behind the scenes like, well, it's a lot of noise, but it's hard to tell. I mean, in the economic development sphere, are these projects still going forward? I mean, there's been so much invested. How much do we really think is still happening and how much not? Because that was a huge thing for Louisiana.
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of gets back to my first point. I don't think this need for an all-of-the-above energy strategy that has less impact on the environment's going away. So there have been some hiccups, but I'm trying to think of specific projects that have not happened. And man, so there's one project that I'm thinking of that is in the west part of the state that is a direct air capture project that was depending on funding from the Department of Energy that might not get funded. So that's for federally. There has been the shakiness on the wind farm stuff that was paused, and that impacts us because we're doing things like building the vessels to service those, as well as we have local companies that are building the actual wind turbines themselves. But that's going to be temporary, I believe, because as we approach midterms, a lot of those workers who are working on those projects were supporters of the president. So I think we're going to see that change. So I think that I think, Stephanie, when people are telling you that a lot of this stuff is going forward, I think that's true. I think the best way to think about it is that when we had our presentation under John Bell Edwards, this is back when Ileana was still with GNO before she was stolen by Susan Bourgeois, when Susan Bourgeois was still my board chair before she left and took everybody, we had this slide, you've seen this, Stephanie, it said, Louisiana's all of the above clean energy strategy. And it had everything from oil, because we have companies like Log up in Covington that just had a repurposed oil rig that saves 87% on emissions because it's an old Anadarko rig that they use for their new deepwater rig, all the way through to biofuels, all the way to nuclear. And it was everything, it was all over the way, and I agree, very hopeful for our state, our best chance. All we did for the new regime was do nothing different except we made nuclear bigger, because nuclear is popular again, which I personally believe it should be. And then we took out the word clean, because clean was kind of a trigger word that people thought meant like Solyndra and throwing good money at sexy projects that wouldn't work. But the actual content is completely unchanged. And we certainly haven't changed our strategy internally. The state hasn't. We're now spending 7 figures to be part of CERAWeek, which is the Davos of energy in Houston. The secretary is there, I'm there, and we're promoting this all of the above lower impact strategy. We just think it's where things are trending inevitably.
And what are you hearing at the state level on that?
The way we approach it is as long as there's a market demand for these types of projects, and a lot of times you're going to have international customers who are demanding some lower carbon solutions. If there's a market demand for it, you're going to see these projects continue to move forward.
Okay. How are we prepared for the booms, whatever the demand generators would be? Infrastructure, utilities, weather resilience, education, workforce training. I mean, how have we, I guess, looked ahead, which is something Louisiana was not traditionally very good at doing?
So let me, I think that we've done a much better job looking ahead, going back, honestly, going back to first term Jindal, when there was this blue ocean strategy that McKinsey did. They actually did a good job, and it was kind of like what's coming up in the future. I think our energy strategy is about that. I think our workforce programs, which are consistently ranked top in the country, are that. The Fast Sites program, which is an area where we have lagged other states in terms of having site prep, is about getting ready for the future. I can't say enough about our LCTCS schools. So for example, we're building this new $2 billion port down in St. Bernard. Tina Tenney with Nunes, has been a big partner of ours. They just announced a maritime training program to get their people ready. I think our biggest challenge relative for the future is actually a branding challenge. Louisiana and certainly New Orleans has such an old-timey type of brand that we've got to kind of create the narrative that we're going back to the future. We're going to keep all that. We're going to always have the French Quarter, but we are also, historically, we've had some of the leading technologies in the world, and now we're doing it again. For example, down at Michoud, where we're building the components with the private sector that's going to put the first woman on the moon and put humankind on Mars. So I think it's a narrative problem, Stephanie, more than anything.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time talking about the branding challenge, and perhaps this is a separate topic, but in terms of, what Michael was able to lead on the Super Bowl this year and using that as a stage to project a new brand for Louisiana. Yes, these are our legacy or asset industries, but here is where we have other opportunities. But in terms of how we're preparing for the future, workforce, of course, that is a top issue for companies, employers. Do you have the workforce to support my company? And so yes, we work closely with community and technical college system to make sure they're training people for the jobs that are going to be there. And then Michael mentioned the Fast Sites program that we are just launching right now. And so that is about preparing infrastructure for the future. So where Louisiana has had some challenges is that a company can come in and look at a site. It could be a building, it could be a large tract of land that's, a bunch of acres. And they look at it and it's got great potential. It's close to rail, it has water access, but it is missing a significant component. Perhaps it needs some tree clearing. Perhaps it needs some flood mitigation. These are all challenges that can be addressed, but it's going to take time and it's going to take money. So what Louisiana has done, the legislature appropriated $150 million for a new site fund. It's called Fast Sites, and we're actually launching it today. Yeah, this week as we speak. And it's very exciting. Louisiana has been behind. This is not a new concept across the country. States have been investing. Across the Gulf Coast, you see states investing $30 million, $50 million, $60 million. Pennsylvania is investing like $400 million in their sites program. But it's about bridging that gap between having a strong site and actually putting in the infrastructure, or a building that's been out of commerce for a while, and you need to have some remediation, get it rehabbed, get it into commerce, and get that generating property tax dollars, generating jobs. So really excited about this opportunity in terms of what it's going to do in anticipating future demand and getting those sites, reducing the time, reducing the risk, reducing the money for companies making those investment decisions.
And that calls to mind the Meta investment in North Louisiana, because one of the key components of that deal, y'all probably know, was that site was ready to go. It had been marketed by LED for years because it was originally secured by, I think, the Blanco administration to try to win an auto plant that didn't come here. And so, if they had had to go through all that, maybe it would not have been as easy to make North Louisiana so competitive. But with that in mind, is there any trickle down here in South Louisiana from the big data center project?
Yeah, it's a great question. My answer is absolutely yes in two senses. One is this branding issue. What I love about the Meta deal is that it basically puts Louisiana at the forefront of AI, and us being at the forefront of a trend is not typical, so it's really good in terms of changing the brand and how people think about us. And I just, have I measured that? No, but you kind of anecdotally know that about how people respond to my Sunday night highlights and just what people talk in text. And so that's good. Then the other trickle down is that it's our anticipation that the headquarters, the white collar jobs for a lot of these companies are going to start ending up in the New Orleans metropolitan area because that's where you're going to attract the people because of the airport. So I think you're going to begin to see this situation where you have, what's a good example of that historically? Shell. So Shell is building their new deep water headquarters. in the River District, but obviously they're doing their exploration out in the Gulf. And so that's kind of the 1-2 that we expect to see over time.
That's kind of headline news, though, Michael. I want to make you just be a little more specific. Do you actually have like leads of this? Have you heard of companies that are looking to locate a regional or national headquarters in New Orleans because of AI in Richland Parish?
So I'm going to answer this honestly because Stephanie always gets me when I don't. Not offhand, but that's the theory of the case.
It's a good theory. I like it.
Well, and I couldn't speak to, like potential projects in the pipeline, can't speak to the specificity. But when you look at what I mentioned about the high impact jobs program in terms of eligibility, and one of the is a company locating a regional headquarters? Are they locating a corporate headquarters here? And so that is the type of incentive that can move the needle for this type of project. And we were talking about a project of that massive scope. The people, they're going to need people and resources and services from across the state. So we're absolutely seeing, those massive projects have effects elsewhere. And we are looking at Louisiana economic development and how is it that we're tracking, because we have some anecdotes, we have some stories, but how is it that we're actually collecting, whether it is the data, without putting a burden on the big companies? Tell us your stories. Tell us how you're using Louisiana vendors, Louisiana services across the state, but to be able to share that story with folks on the impacts statewide.
And for sure you can feel it in North Louisiana, like it's everywhere up there. But down here it's harder to feel at this point.
Well, I mean, let me give you an example of one, because I thought of one.
Good.
Okay. I love when I can get one back on Stephanie. Makes not my day, but like my hour. So who here has seen the Venture Global facility that is down in Plaquemines? Anybody been to it? Yeah. How would you describe it? The Death Star, or? It's insane. It is 700 acres, surrounded by 100-foot high steel curtain wall. It's remarkable. And regardless of what you think about the project specifically, it is encouraging because it shows that we can build big things in America, which I wasn't really sure about. It's the largest privately financed investment in human history. They're currently, with phase 2, going to be $39 billion down there. Like Ileana said, massive impact because the average salary is over 6 figures. It basically has saved Plaquemines Parish, which was really struggling after the Phillips 66 refinery closed in terms of tax revenue. Now, VG is headquartered in Washington, D.C. They have not opened up an office yet in downtown New Orleans, but they have become a very major sponsor of things here, like the Saints, like the Super Bowl. So the dollars are beginning they're a member of GNO Inc. So they're starting to integrate into the urban economy, even though they're an hour away with this massive industrial facility. So no, there's not a Venture Global building yet, but you can see them beginning to understand that they need to be part of this community from a workforce attraction standpoint, from a political standpoint, and those dollars are beginning to flow in.
And when we talk about attracting these sort of white-collar jobs, managerial and administrative positions, so bear with me for a minute. This calls to mind a forum that I moderated in Baton Rouge about 8 years ago. Michael, you were probably there. It was Mayor Sharon Weston Brim in Baton Rouge and the newly elected LaToya Cantrell. And after my panel was over, I was in the audience, and a big economic development person who has since retired and is not in the audience here got up to speak, and I was scrolling because it was kind of boring, and I see that U.S. News and World Report has issued its latest rankings, and Louisiana is dead last in every quality of life outcome. So I put on my reporter hat, and I raised my hand during the Q&A, and I said, hey, while we've been talking, blah, 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 blah. And he said, well, we, in economic development stay in our swim lane, and we don't worry about fetal birth, right, and on and on and on. And by the way, I was never invited to moderate another economic development panel again. But because if people can't bring workers here to go to good public schools, to play in nice parks, how do you attract white blue-collar jobs. How do you get people to bring middle-class workers here?
I-
That's the big question.
I almost dropped an F-bomb here on stage, but maybe that's because that's what some of the people who were on that previous stage would have done. But I'm not going to, but that was a triggering question.
I'm sorry.
I don't
You were
feel,
there.
I don't feel safe. But let me be very clear about this, and Ileana will know this because this is like GNO Inc. 101. All right. First of all, the measure of economic development, and I would argue political success, is population. That is the ultimate measure. That is the proxy for everything that rolls up into it. And if you look at that measure, and these are just facts, over the past 10 years, okay, Louisiana has lost 3% of its population. We actually gained some last year, but over the past 10 years, it's negative 3%. Our region, our 10 parishes, is negative 2%, and Orleans is negative 10%. Those are just the facts, y'all. I mean, and there's no point in hiding our head in the sand on that because they can still see our you-know-what, and they're going to kick it. Okay. Now, what goes into those numbers? To me, there are four things. The first one is like double-weighted or triple-weighted. That's economic opportunity. People are going to move where there are good jobs. People are not moving to Plano, Texas because it's beautiful or because it's fun. It's called Plano, right? It's not called Exciting-O, right? But there's a crap ton of jobs there, so people are moving there, right? That's the most important. The second thing is quality of life. And quality of life is about infant mortality. It is about maternal health care. It is about public safety. It is about, not getting shot or not getting drowned. It is about having nice parks. Those things matter to people, right? And if those things are too poor, as the U.S. News and World Report thing, reflects, then people are going to not want to be there unless there's a really incredible job that's paying, then maybe they tolerate it, right? Then the third thing is affordability, which historically has been in our favor. But over the past few years, we've gotten slammed by insurance. To some degree, flood insurance, but that's a slow-moving glacier compared to homeowners, right? Homeowners has crushed us. It has made home ownership on the South Shore unaffordable for many people. And then that's been compounded by auto insurance, right? Where if you look at our auto insurance, we have below the national average in terms of number of accidents, but 50% over the national average in terms of soft tissue injuries, which either means that we have weak necks or strong billboard attorneys, okay? So you put all that stuff together and it's not good. The fourth thing that wraps up into all of it is narrative and leadership and vision and storytelling. And man, you need somebody I remember like Mayor Suarez in Miami during COVID. He would go out there with his loafers, no socks, his Gucci belt, his shirt unbuttoned, one too many buttons. And he'd be like, come on, New York, come down to the free state of Florida, party on a boat in Miami. And it worked for a while because that was like a compelling narrative to some people that I don't want to associate with. And so the U.S. News and World Report thing, man, it is dead serious from an economic development standpoint for the state.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be silly at Louisiana Economic Development to say, oh, we have, nice.
Aren't y'all?
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I got him going.
Yeah,
Made
to
it
think that we
interesting.
can attract companies, attract jobs, attract all that with just, talking about our natural infrastructure and our good tax policy and not talking about insurance, not talking about education where we have lagged and health outcomes. And that's why when you hear, Secretary Bourgeois speak, she always talks about the whole of government approach because we cannot accomplish this on our own. We need to engage with other partners. Some of our team was meeting with the Department of Health yesterday, looking at how we can take the upcoming round of opportunity zones that are in the big, beautiful bill, and how can we tie that to some health outcomes and rural hospitals and opportunity zones with rural hospitals, and how can we integrate on that? Because we need to, we're not going to lead on it necessarily, but we can work together in different ways. And education, part of it is, yes, we need to acknowledge that there is a challenge there. Part of it is the narrative, though, but because I was talking to some folks, National Conference, folks from the East Coast, and we were talking about rankings and how Louisiana has not done great, and they're like, you should really look at, most improved, like work on most improved. I'm like, no, we're gonna overall, top 10, top 20, we need to look beyond like most improved category. And so there was, I think, maybe not quite a year ago, where there was national testing for fourth grade reading, and Louisiana was fourth grade reading, 16th overall in reading. Not most improved, but in the top 20 for reading. And so just messaging the investments that we're making in education and where we do have improvement and where our strengths are is something that we need to do along with the work in insurance that GNO Inc. has led strong in the conversations we're having with other state agencies.
So you were right, Stephanie. You were right back then.
I'm going to make it up to Michael here. So one area where we really did shine of late was the Super Bowl, and New Orleans rose to the occasion, addressed a lot of those just sticky problems that were out there, like potholes and roads that needed to be fixed. But we do tend to rally when it's things like that. What other areas, or sectors rather, can we see examples of that where we shine and where we have opportunity to shine even brighter with just a little elbow grease and a little organization from a czar who takes it on?
Yeah. So I think what the Super Bowl showed, and it was really a Louisiana example because it was very much the governor being involved, and it involved Jefferson Parish very much as well, was that, we can be world class. And so that is both encouraging but also disappointing, because it shows that a lot of the other times we succumb to the tyranny of mediocrity, and we think that it's okay just to be okay. But in terms of places that we have an opportunity to shine, I do think that the culture of Louisiana and the brand of New Orleans is a massive competitive advantage, because the world is becoming so homogeneous. I mean, how many times have you been in an airport or woken up in a hotel and had that momentary disconcertion because you don't know where the hell you are, right? In our region, in New Orleans, you always know where you are because of how it looks, because of how it feels, because of how it smells. In a good way,
Yeah.
usually. So I think that what we saw with the Super Bowl, what we saw with Taylor Swift as an example. My favorite image of Taylor Swift was when we had this group of 14-year-old girls singing Taylor Swift karaoke on Bourbon Street outside Rick's. Now bear with me. Bear with me on this. Because I think what that showed me is that we can still have all the funkiness, all the weirdness, all the, PG-13, or maybe R-ratedness of our place, which people crave, all the humanity, all the culture, all the intimacy, but we also can be safe and accessible. And again, going back to the Super Bowl, all it really requires is focus and an executive mandate. And that's really what we had for the Super Bowl, and I think we could apply it to any of our problem areas, whether it is homelessness or healthcare or education. None of this stuff is rocket science. Other places have done it. The big secret, and this is what I worry about, Stephanie, is that, so I was just in Detroit. Anybody been in Detroit recently? Yeah. Detroit's doing pretty damn well. Now, one reason is that Dan Gilbert is investing billions. But the other is that they had a really good mayor, Mayor Duggan, or Duggan. How do you say it, Duggan or Duggan? Duggan. Mayor Duggan, Mayor McLovin, and they had him for 12 years. So it was sustained. And so what I worry about is not our ability to do something, but to do it on a sustained basis. And that requires leadership that really is there and wants to have the focus. And that's been a challenge for us historically.
What about other places in the state, or Baton Rouge, which gets short shrift down here in New Orleans, but it has a lot to offer too? I mean, other areas or?
Yeah. I mean, Shreveport has a lot of connectivity that companies are interested in, and there's different aspects. There's a lot of timber, for companies that need that in central Louisiana, there's different assets. I did want to build upon what Michael was saying in terms of, where does this city, where does a region shine bright? And we don't have a challenge getting people in the door. People love New Orleans, they love the culture, they love the food. I was in New York not too long ago, and there was a line around the corner for a restaurant. I was like, what is that? It was like Creole food, gumbo, I think it was called gumbo, the restaurant. People are interested, but once they come here, how do we get folks to stay? And, there's a saying amongst some economic development folks, and, companies come to a place based on promises, but they expand based on experience. And so how do you build upon that experience that a company has had? And that's really what's exciting at our agency, at Economic Development, is the expansion. So when you bring in a Meta or you bring in a big project, that's great. New people, new money. But when a company expands, they're signaling that this is a good place to do business. Our employees like living here. And so those are particularly exciting. The expansions is something that we need to spend more time, our focus, our energy on, and also highlight and elevate and tell people, this company has had a good experience, and how do we tell that story to other folks nationally? And that's been part of the efforts at the Secretary. We have a goal of meeting with these driver companies who are driving economies across the state, but showing them that we're there to support them, and what can we do to keep you here and help you expand. And in terms of what shines bright, it's not as sexy as the Super Bowl, but your dollar goes farther here. And so, you look at property taxes and we're like, oh, Texas has all this great stuff. You go and you sit on these tax panels and they decry their property taxes. They're like, we have been moving in the wrong direction. It's getting worse and worse. Like property, this audience clearly knows that, but property taxes, now income taxes lowering. Like the dollar going farther is a real asset that we have in terms of quality of life, frankly.
Those are both really great points. Time maybe for just one more question, and that would be sort of broadly, what is the most promising trend that you see right now that gives you hope, and conversely, what keeps you up at night?
Nothing keeps me up if I drink enough. Most promising thing is bourbon. So without doubt, for the state, the most promising thing is this all-of-the-above energy strategy. We have been a laggard since the oil bust of the 80s, and I think we can go back to the future by being an all-of-the-above future energy state. That is, there are a lot of things I'm excited about: shipbuilding, aerospace, the new port, but in Globo, it's that. What keeps me up at night is, right now, I would argue, from the governor who has cell phone connectivity to the president, to having Mike Johnson and Steve Scalise in the 1-2 positions. We're the only state in history to ever have that, down to Louisiana economic development, where I would put my money that Secretary Susan Bourgeois is the best ever, certainly the best I've ever worked with, and her team is the best ever, because most of them came from GNO Inc. Down to what we have at the regional level, where now, I've got 20 years of making mistakes, but still have energy to make new ones. What I worry about is that alignment might only last until midterms, which are 300 and some odd days away. So we have to make hay while the sun shines. We will not have this alignment forever. Well, now including having a new energized mayor in New Orleans, who I was on the phone with earlier today, who's coming out of the gate really hot. So that's what I stress about, Stephanie, is that we have this moment. Are we going to? I'm about to start quoting Eminem lyrics, or Let It Slip, but. By the way, guess who saved the film incentive in Louisiana? Who knows? 50 Cent. So 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson, and Governor Landry are now best buds. Is that true?
That is true.
And because 50 Cent is going to be building the second largest African American owned film studio and community in Shreveport, Louisiana. That's your fun fact of the day. Yep, go Shorty.
Ileana, what about you?
In terms of what, no, I think it's fabulous because it's true. All that you just said is true, and it's exciting, and we're seeing it across the state, which is really exciting. I think that really that is what is exciting about the investments across the state that are happening. You know, like I'm always cheering for New Orleans. I live here, but there's growth happening in New Orleans. There's growth happening in Southwest. We're seeing Meta in Northeast. We're seeing this investment in Northwest. So it's really exciting because, you know, it's great if New Orleans does well, but we need the whole state to do well. It helps in attracting new companies, but in terms of, what keeps me up at night, some of the population challenges, we're always very first and foremost in terms of, you don't have to go very far to ask, where's your son, where's your daughter, where's your sister, where's your brother, and some of the more higher educated folks tend to be the ones that leave, and so that is always top of mind from the secretary, all of us in terms of devising policies, but that in terms of keeping our best and brightest in Louisiana is something that keeps us up and looking for ways to bring them back.
Well, y'all, thank you so much. We are out of time, but really enjoyed the discussion. Michael Hecht, Ileana, Ledet.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Illy. Thank you, everybody. Come back later for the adult show.
Commercial real estate agents need tools they can trust. Unlock your advantage by joining the Louisiana Commercial Database, built by brokers for brokers. Search listings quickly by map, access demographics, and showcase your properties. Membership gives you statewide exposure, unlimited listings, advanced analytics, and professional reports. Strengthen your business by tracking listing traffic, capturing leads, and building your online profile. LACDB helps brokers work smarter, close deals faster, and stay ahead in the market. Visit lacdb.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our first break. Our next session will begin promptly at 10:30. Remember, this is a great time to get those perforated cards out and get your CE credits. Please pass them to the members and committee members and staff at the exit doors. We need to have those in before lunch. A reminder that this break is sponsored by LACDB.com, your premier Louisiana commercial real estate resource. We'll see you guys back at 10:30 sharp.